We're here today with Lisa Butters, the General Manager of GoDirect Trade, correct?
Yep.
And we are at the Blockchain Expo in North America.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Lisa. I'm curious about your background.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. It's a great day here in California. As mentioned, I'm the general manager for GoDirect Trade, and that is an online marketplace powered by Honeywell. And really the marketplace focuses on the sale of used aerospace parts. What's really interesting about this marketplace is that used aerospace parts is about a $4 billion industry, but virtually none of the transactions are done online, which is crazy considering, all the people in this world that, half of the world today probably placed an order on Amazon before you got out of bed this morning. So it's a really interesting thing that the majority of transactions that are done for used parts, it's actually done through emails and phone calls in a really antiquated way. If anything, it's kind of like used cars 15 years ago when it was very relationship based, come to the dealership, I'll make you a deal, nothing was transparent. That's exactly what used aerospace is like today. So anyway, when we launched this marketplace about a year ago, we knew that our biggest hurdle was to really figure out why people weren't transacting online. It's a big dollar industry, but why weren't people taking advantage of digital when in their everyday lives it's something that they have come to expect? And so we kind of worked backwards, right? I mean, that's where we had researched about, it's the experience. Yes, you want an easy consumer-like experience. GoDirect Trade is kind of a blend between Amazon and Etsy. It's like Amazon in that it takes 10 seconds to place an order. It's like Etsy in that you can have a customized storefront. And so you could be a mom and pop all the way to a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and you can launch within 5 minutes and start selling parts online. But despite the fact that you can have the perfect user experience, there was still that really nagging question of why are people not putting parts in their cart and checking out? And that's really when we looked at, how blockchain could potentially help us solve that customer problem. These are aerospace parts, so they are high dollar. We have everything from, $1 screws all the way to multi-million-dollar engines that are listed for sale. And if you think about that, our average order is about $10,000. The odds of someone putting that in their cart and checking out, kind of like if you were to buy a couch, on overstock.com, buying a $3,000 couch, it's a little bit pricey, right, to put that in your cart and check out. But if the average order that we transact is about $10,000, that's high dollar, right? So there has to be a lot of trust between the buyer and the seller for someone to feel safe enough to put it in their cart and to check out. And that's why we really looked at blockchain technology. At its core, blockchain technology is really a way to manufacture trust between the buyer and seller, but in a digital way without human intervention. So the way that we use it in our marketplace is we kind of use it like Carfax. Carfax, if you've ever bought a used car before, it tells you everything there is to know about the car before you make the purchase. Maybe it was in a cold weather state and you don't want all that damage to your engine from the snow. Maybe it was in an accident. We use it in the same way. So inside of aerospace, we try to figure out and collect as much information about the part as possible. Who were previous owners of the part? What aircraft did it get installed at? If you are on our marketplace and you see two parts with the same part number, but one was owned maybe by Delta Airlines and maybe another was owned by an individual name, then you may feel safer trying to check out with something that that Delta Airlines had installed on their aircraft. And this is a really big deal. In used aerospace parts, the average time that a part changes hands is 4 owners, which is different, right? Usually with used cars, it may have a few owners, 1 or 2. But in used aerospace, we recycle parts a lot, and high dollar parts. And so for us, we use blockchain technology because it's a way for us to crowdsource the data in a highly secure way. These parts are being touched by airliners, dismantlers, brokers, repair shops, individual sellers. And the technology allows us to have us collect all of that data in a really secure way. And then show that onto the marketplace. So we basically use all of the data to provide it to the consumer ahead of time so that they can make a far more efficient and a better business decision when they're trying to figure out if they want to buy the part or not.
Before blockchain, how would you go about knowing who owned the parts beforehand?
Oh my gosh. I mean, in the world of aerospace, it's pretty antiquated in terms of like paperwork and ownership trails. You think about when you buy a house, it's kind of all within the title, right? There are websites that you can go to and you can look up who owned the title prior to, you owning the house and along its history. And with aerospace, that whole, ownership trail of who owned it previously, you would have to physically make sure that, like that bill of sale piece of paper followed that part with the box. It's almost impossible to really figure out who owned it, 3 people before you owned it. It's very, very difficult. And so I think what you run into is, in order for a part to be safe enough to reinstall back into an aircraft, what you have to do is, if you don't really have the paperwork of who owned it and what was done to it in the past, you typically have to take that part and do like a full overhaul to it and to recertify it and get back into shape, and so you can reinstall it back into the aircraft. So big dollars, right? I mean, you have a part that if you don't know really where it came from, it's not worth a lot. So now you have to put in all the dollars to overhaul it or to recertify it so it can go back into an aircraft.
In Honeywell's view, or in your view, how does blockchain change all of this?
So blockchain, as mentioned before, it's this technology where, for big enterprise companies like a Honeywell, it is a way where we feel safe enough to kind of crowdsource the data. Blockchain's a game changer for us because typically within some of these big Fortune, 500 or 100 companies, we look at our data as this walled garden approach. We don't want to share our data. We don't want people to look at our data. We just want to house our own data. And in this case, we need all of the data. When it comes to serialized parts that we list for sale in the marketplace, we want to know everything about that part and what's happened to it in the past. But in order to get that information, then all of these companies or enterprises that have touched these parts, we can't all be in these walled gardens. And so what blockchain does is it allows us to break down those walls, not have the walled garden approach, and start collaborating and sharing our data as to what's been going on with the parts, but again, in a highly secure way where people feel comfortable using a very secure technology.
How did blockchain come into the conversation at Honeywell?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because within aerospace, and it's funny, we're at a blockchain conference now, and you can see how much the maturity level in different industries varies greatly when it comes to blockchain. Within aerospace, I would safely say, and I would be interested if anyone would argue to the point, but I think blockchain is very infantile in the aerospace industry. We're barely scratching the surface, and so how did blockchain come into play in terms of like when did we decide that this could be the technology? It all started from launching the marketplace and starting with the customer problem of why are people not checking out? And when we thought about why are people not checking out, we did like the 5 whys, and it really came down to trust. They don't trust each other enough to check out unless they know the person, they can pick up the phone and call, they can email, they can negotiate, give them the warm and fuzzy that, I'm here and this isn't a scam. And we thought, what? We read more and more about blockchain, that blockchain could be the technology that builds that trust digitally without human intervention. And that's really how the conversation started, was with the customer problem of why are they not checking out? There isn't enough trust built into that transaction yet.
Do you think that there is also a lack of trust in the paper trail and the processes and procedures to keep track of these parts, or were people confident in that?
No, I would safely say within aerospace, some companies are definitely far better at, quality paperwork and keeping paperwork really organized. But in general, I think that it's really difficult. When you have an aerospace part and it changes hands 4 times, how do you expect, when everything is just done with a piece of paper, like to track who's owned it, how do you expect to keep that piece of paper with that part always, right? So I think that people's confidence in traceability can be low, especially within aerospace and the quality paperwork, which is why you're seeing more and more trying to move into digitizing all of their paperwork. I think blockchain takes it to that next level. You're not only, digitizing all of your paperwork, but at the same time you're allowing, the breaking of the walled garden approach, that people can start, sharing data, collaborating, and looking at all of the data points for a particular part.
How is Honeywell implementing blockchain? Or what technologies are you using?
Yeah, so right now we have invested heavily. We have a very robust blockchain platform. We use Hyperledger Fabric. That is a really good product in terms of helping us build an enterprise-grade platform. And it also allows us to build multiple channels on our platform. So what does that mean? What that means is that when you build multiple channels, you are able to very quickly have other kind of business groups and areas test using your same blockchain platform without stepping on the toes of what we're doing, say with like GoDirect Trade and our part pedigree platform, where we're trying to collect data across our ecosystem as it relates to parts. So other areas that Honeywell is really actively looking at, and it all relates back to trying to get more information about parts as possible, is we recently ventured into looking at how blockchain can help us solve some of the counterfeit activities that we're seeing within aerospace. The reason why it came up is because a lot of people, when they think of blockchain, they associate it to anti-counterfeit and being a technology that can combat against counterfeit activities, but really by itself, it doesn't do anything like that. It doesn't do anything to combat counterfeit parts. But when you couple blockchain with other technologies, I think that's where you can really get the power of really combating counterfeit. So what we did at Honeywell is we had been working with blockchain for quite a bit, and we talk about it a lot, we meet a lot of people, and we happened to meet two startup companies. One is called iTrace out of California. The other one is called Secure Marking. iTrace is run by Mark Manning. Secure Marking is run by Daniel Stanton. And really what iTrace does is they have a patented unhackable QR code that you can laser etch onto parts, aerospace parts. And then Secure Marking, for lack of a better word, it's like a magic ink. You can put the ink right on top of that QR code and it's invisible to the naked eye. And you need a special light to actually activate the frequency. And so you can't see it unless you have a special light. So for us, we thought about, okay, just like, the Fed does, a 5-factor authentication on a $100 bill, how do we take that type of technology and put it on aerospace parts? And so we ran a very quick trial on some of our parts. And what we did is we took the ID plates, we laser etched the unhackable QR code, and then we placed the magic ink from Secure Marking. And we also had another magic ink trial with an ink that Honeywell actually produces as well. We have an advanced materials group that provides a similar technology to Secure Marking, and so we tried that trial as well with their markings or with their ink. So we applied that 2-factor authentication to our starter. And so what that means is as soon as I manufacture the starter, it's ready to be birthed, like go live, it's like born, so to speak, in the world of manufacturing. And it will receive that QR code, and it'll receive the magic ink, and then you basically scan the QR code, and then it creates its digital birth certificate, so to speak, on our digital blockchain ledger. What's really cool is Honeywell, we are a global manufacturer of aerospace parts, and every 2 seconds something comes off our manufacturing line, and every 2 seconds all of that data gets written to the blockchain ledger. So we always have, from now until the end of time, we will always have these digital birth certificates of all of our Honeywell parts on to our blockchain. So it's a really exciting time for Honeywell in general, because I think because in aerospace we're just scratching the surface on the technology, Honeywell is making really big moves to commit to using the technology. And you can see that within our manufacturing environment, as soon as anything is birthed, we are writing it to the ledger. So we are fully committed to embedding blockchain technology within our manufacturing process, within our repair process, and even within, you see our software in our marketplace, within our marketplace process.
What sorts of information are you able to capture now that was impossible before about the parts?
Yeah. So one cool thing that Honeywell is doing with blockchain technology is we are able to create, so think of parts, right? If you have a starter, and so it's like a physical aerospace part. And what we use blockchain for is there's an ID plate on top of, a part. And what we do is we take pictures. So someone will physically take a picture of the ID plate. They'll start taking pictures of the starter. And pictures are taken so that they get uploaded to the marketplace for sale. One cool thing that we do is we use blockchain technology in conjunction with OCR, optical character recognition. So when people are receiving those parts in before they get listed for sale, once they scan the ID plate or they take a picture of the ID plate, it runs through our OCR technology to read the part numbers and serial numbers. And then what blockchain does is all of the paperwork that travels with that part We store all of the bits and bytes of all the quality paperwork. So instead of it being a PDF document, we take all the content from like a quality paperwork and we put it in the ledger. And so what happens during induction is we compare what's on the ID plate using OCR compared to the paperwork that we have stored in our blockchain ledger, which is bits and bytes, and we make sure that those two things match before it moves on to the next step, which is packaging it and making sure that we can list it for sale. So I think that's another example where we're using the technology in terms of trying to use it to really make the process more efficient and more accurate.
What are people within the aerospace industry saying about the potential of blockchain and Honeywell's work?
They are, I would say, so the people that we worked with, for example, with that trial, where we're trying to mark aerospace parts with a two-factor authentication process, right? And then we're trying to load it to the ledger so that we can follow the part where it is throughout its life cycle from birth to death. They are firmly entrenched that this could be a game changer for aerospace. So I'll give you an example why. If you think about aerospace counterfeit parts and how often it happens, it's kind of like a diamond heist or like a cybersecurity attack. You really don't hear about those things in the news because they don't happen all that often, but it's really because the people who are in charge of those diamonds, they put a lot of security and measures around so it never does happen. It's the same with aerospace and anti-counterfeit activity. It very rarely happens, very, very rarely happens, and it's because we put a ton of security around it. But when it does, it's a really, really bad thing. In the case of aerospace and counterfeit, the way that we combat anti-counterfeit is we put a very intricate, complex process in place to audit our suppliers, audit where parts are coming from, and these are all very manual kind of checks in order to ensure that the parts that we're getting are authentic. And they're going back into Honeywell parts, and then ultimately our Honeywell part is authentic as well. If you think about what blockchain does for this process, we can take all of the complexities out of auditing suppliers, of auditing where parts came from, because if I can, at the source, as soon as a part is born, track it with blockchain, by the time it gets to Honeywell, even if it took 50 stops along the way, I can scan that part, figure out where it came from, and if it came from an authorized source, then it's fine. I don't need this really complex network of auditing and checks and authorized distributors in order to tell me that the part is authentic. And so there's a ton of waste and process that can be eliminated in our supply chain by using this technology. And that's why we're incredibly excited about it. And that goes deeper into the bill of materials. So that's one reason why we're excited about it. The other reason why we're really excited about it is because, think about it, from an aerospace perspective, if we mark our parts and once we sell it to the customer, if we're able to track the changing of hands, where parts are getting installed, where they're getting sold to, when they actually get scrapped out, when they die, that's a really big deal for any company to know what is going on with their parts, right? Mm-hmm. And so from a Honeywell perspective, when we look at what blockchain technology can do for our parts and how we track them and how we manage them in our supply chain process, it's a true game changer for us.
And is this for private aviation and commercial aviation, or?
Yeah, it is. So it's it's for both. It's whether you're talking about parts that are going into passenger planes or whether it's an individual operator. These are parts both in the commercial and private sector, and they're marketplace as well. So our marketplace, we sell to airlines and we also sell to individual operators of their plane. And we had sold a used engine for $100,000 that went onto a 1984 IAI aircraft to keep it flying. And that was somebody with a Gmail account. So we sell, from Gmail accounts all the way up to, the largest airlines in the world.
At heart, this is a safety issue, is it not?
It is. So it's two things. One, the way that Honeywell is using blockchain technology in its supply chain manufacturing process, yeah, I think it is, because blockchain is a way to remove the complexities of the supply chain to make sure parts are authentic and, to bring that efficiency to bear. But at the same time, the flip side of, like from a marketplace perspective where I really run the business, it's really about transparency for me. Like blockchain is the means in which I can bring transparency to the consumer. and really change that industry from doing emails and phone calls for $4 billion in sales into online sales. So I think it's both.
Did you have any experience personally with blockchain before you started experimenting
No.
it? What have you learned during that time?
Oh my God. We've learned so much. I mean, we've really been in earnest aggressively developing blockchain applications for about a year now. And I mean, like everyone who's just starting in any new infantile technology, it all starts with, like, you research about it, right? You start watching YouTube videos, you start talking to people about it, you start reading case studies and white papers. And that's not really, or honestly, how we started, is just trying to figure out what is the technology and really can it solve the problem that we're trying to solve. And then once we got started, it just became this really big snowball where, you know, the more and more that we use it, the more and more we realize how it can really change the game for our business and for, you know, our processes. And that's why you see us just aggressively, Honeywell is just aggressively looking at, you know, how to leverage the technology and expand it further.
And you're working on some of these apps in an open source capacity with Hyperledger, is that true?
Yes.
What's that process been like? Did you have experience with open source before this?
Yeah,
or?
we have. And like there's a lot of, I mean, within Honeywell, within our connected enterprise, we have a product called Honeywell Forge, which is enterprise performance management software. And that whole thing is built off of open source architecture. So the whole concept of open source is not foreign to us by any means. In fact, I would say whether it's Honeywell Forge or whether it's GoDirect Trade or whether it's blockchain and developing on our Hyperledger platform, our mantra is it needs to be open source. Obviously with security, but I mean, the new age is to make sure that we're open enough so that others can help develop with us very quickly to get applications out so we can start testing them and seeing what's going to go and what's not going to go.
So what's next for Honeywell when it comes to blockchain and distributed ledger?
That's a really good question. So right now our focus is obviously leveraging blockchain and expanding our ecosystem. So that's one, is blockchain in an enterprise setting, it's really a team sport. If Honeywell's the only person on the blockchain ledger, this is not going to work. And so quite honestly, our main focus right now is building out the ecosystem with the right players. We need more and more companies, and we do have them today, but we need more and more, whether it's companies, repair shops, mom and pops, inside of our blockchain ecosystem, spooling up their own nodes or inputting data through our user interface so that we can continue to collect all that data. Because if it's just us in it, it's not going to work. And so really it's expansion of the ecosystem. The other things that Honeywell is looking towards, besides expanding our counterfeit solution that we had talked about previously, is there's other areas like additive manufacturing that we're highly interested in when it comes to blockchain, digitizing engine logbooks using blockchain. I feel like it's kind of endless. But I do think that, you know, you can get a little bit caught up in trying so many use cases and then not building like full-blown production applications, which is why the way that we have it structured with our Hyperledger fabric and the multiple channels where you can develop on it, it's great so you can build a ton of use cases. But at the same time, right now, our bread and butter will be expanding the ecosystem for our part pedigree network so we can collect as much information about parts as possible. And then really trying to take our parts marking and our supply chain process and going deeper and deeper into the bill of materials to really make that marking process prevalent across all of the suppliers that supply into Honeywell, and then further into the supply chain into, like, you know, where we install.
Building communities, I think, is a big challenge for all networks, all blockchain networks. I was at a conference recently, and Jed McCaleb, who is in charge of Stellar, which is a fintech platform. He was talking about this is one of the big challenges they've had. A lot of projects tried these airdrop experiments, which I don't think really worked in terms of building out these ecosystems. How does Honeywell or GoDirect Trade go about that?
Honestly, it is like winning over, you know, person by person, company by company. It's really what it's going to take, which is why Honeywell is, you know, why I'm speaking with you today, right? We want to get the word out that blockchain isn't just for cryptocurrencies, and it's not just for the finance industry or the diamond industry or the food industry. It has major implications within aerospace for the better. And so it's really about not only educating people, and Honeywell's trying to kind of take the lead in educating within aerospace why blockchain technology can be a game changer, but really setting an example, right? We've been developing aggressively for a year. We use it day in and day out within our marketplace. We're trying to build out the ecosystem. We're not going to stop until we get more and more big players onto our ecosystem, and we're trying to expand it within our manufacturing environment. So we're trying to set the example that, hey, it can change the game, but we all, the big players and the small ones, we all need to participate in it in order for it to work.
We've spoken today with Lisa Butters, the General Manager of GoDirect Trade at Honeywell. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.